stream. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Whether you are in the US or not, happy Thanksgiving Day. It's always good to celebrate a day where we feel grateful. And I feel extremely grateful to be in today's conversation of the good after COVID-19. As we are starting here with a large group. Peter, can I ask you to switch on the video right now? And then we'll call you in a second. Thank you. I'm here with Sarah, together with Sarah and Kim Pullman, who today couldn't be here with us for some family reasons. We have started Good After COVID-19 back in March. And it was the beginning of the pandemic. And our main question at that time was really, can we find and look for the good even when the wounds are still open? And we thought back then that the wounds would start to heal much earlier. And here we are today, we still with our wounds, and sometimes I feel like the wounds have just become bigger and even more causing pain to us. So one more reason to look for the good in what we are living. This is a series of conversation, Good After COVID-19, that aim at making sense of what's happening around us and look for the good. One of the most respectful leader, I dare to say, in the world, which is Pope Francesco, just recently reminded us again that when a crisis comes, we never come out of a crisis the same. We either come out worse or better. And that's a very powerful statement. And Good After COVID is really a series of conversation is really looking at how can we come out better from this crisis. So we have run a number of conversations before this one on different topics: education, science and spirituality, financial systems. We've been looking at tipping points for new paradigm, at values, and in all this conversation, we've been trying to make sense and look for the good. What kind of conversation are these? We call them fishbowl virtual conversation, meaning they are inclusive conversation. So we actually in this room, there's not only me and Sarah, there's a group of around 20 thought leaders from around the world that we have invited. And I would like to ask everybody for a second to put your video on so that we can have a sense of who is in the room. Thank you. Oh, now it feels much better, less lonely. Nothing against Sarah, it's just me and her spent too much time together already. Wow, thank you. Exactly. This is the group that will be engaged in the conversation in a few minutes. And basically, we will get started. Yes, you can put your video off again for a second and we'll call you back. We will start with Sarah. We'll get us started. We will get started with Sarah. Oh,
thank you. I hear a big echo. Good. Thank you so much, Carlo.
Somebody can mute yourself, please.
So I think that the journey we did since the pandemic started, I still remember the call, was March 10th when I called you saying, hey, we should do something. We were pretty frustrated. We were in Italy in the middle of the big crisis happening and nothing was expected to be like that at the beginning. So what we started seeing was really that this virus had the power to make the invisible visible. Suddenly, we all have been, say, put in front of the big crisis that was affecting for the first time in history everyone in every place in the world. And of course, we started really seeing which were the essential needs for humans, the essential needs of connection and care and safety that we were all feeling. And of course, when we talk about food is at the epicenter of everything. Because of course, food is energy, food is life, food must be health Food is also sociality, is care, is family, is identity, is tradition. Food is really touching everyone in the world, in a good way or in a bad way. And anyway, food and the food system, we all know how much is going to be affected by the big climate change, climate issues happening around the world, but also we know how much has been affected, the chain, the food chain, the big commodities around the world that we all have been seeing reshaped in this months. So today we really wanted to start to touch the biggest pain point. So starting talking about inequality. Inequalities from farm to fork, because when we talk about inequalities, of course, we see inequalities both at the beginning of the chain, in the middle, around, and arriving up in our cities, where there are tons of inequalities happening also here, very close to us. And so we decided to invite many diverse people from many different parts of the world, from Bogota to different countries in Africa represented today, and different countries in Europe, but also Canada and US that actually this morning are getting ready to celebrate with their loved ones, with their families, Thanksgiving. That anyway is a very symbolic day in the year for them. So I don't want to take too much time, and I would love to kick off this journey. But first of all, I would love also Anthony to join us on stage, because I think that this journey was really precious because we joined forces also with Reboot the Future. And here we're talking about rebooting the future. We want to reboot the system. And there was something that was pretty much inspiring during this journey, and ingredients that was always like a fil rouge connecting all the fish bowls.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi there, everyone. I'm very pleased to be deputizing for Kim Pullman and trying to fill her shoes today. My name is Anthony Bennett. I have the great privilege of being the chief executive of Reboot the Future. Reboot was co-founded by Kim to advance the Sustainable Development Goals upon a very straightforward premise. And that very simple idea is this: it's a world based on the Golden Rule. It's an idea which has occurred in multiple cultures across time. First established by Confucianism, it's a philosophy that can be found in multiple secular and faith traditions, including Buddhism, Ubuntu, and the great Abrahamic faiths also. So the Golden Rule is simply this: to do unto others and the planet as we would do unto ourselves. Now, at its widest level, this spirit is exemplified in the idea of a just transition, that the idea that the global North should treat the global South as a partner on a shared journey to sustainability. But this philosophy also has the micro dimension, and on a personal level, there is an example given by the anthropologist Klaus Levi-Strauss. Levi-Strauss notes that in restaurants in the south of France, he can see the following ritual between strangers. Before a meal begins, a man will pour his wine from the bottle, not into his own glass, but his neighbor's. And his neighbor, a stranger, then does the same. Now, in an economic sense, nothing has happened. No money changes hands, and nobody has any more wine than they had before. But something has happened. Society has appeared where there was none before. So in food and drink, the Golden Rule demands that we extend respect, not only to the vendors and the farmers who provide our food, but to the animals in the fields from which we extract it, and that we treat every part of the supply chain with honor and dignity. I'm very pleased that Reboot continues its association with the Good After COVID series, which has continued throughout 2020 to function as a kind of laboratory for how we might pick a path beyond the pandemic. And I look forward to hearing the thoughts from our speakers today. So on that note, I'll now pass over to Sarah to make introductions.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And today, actually, I'm pretty thrilled because we are going to involve people that are bringing different perspective, but also representing different generations, different part of the world, different part of the chain. We know how much is crucial nowadays, the role of chefs, for example. And here we have a big part of people that are coming from this part of the chain, but also the role of farmers, the role of educators, scientists, the role of entrepreneurs, the role of the industry, the role of the policymakers. I think that 17th of the goal is the most important one and is really pushing us to work together and try to facilitate not only conversation, but also mutual and cooperative actions. And let's say I'm gonna also invite all the youth and people following us on the different social media now in this moment to join the conversation, ask your question, because we would love, of course, to get inspired from your question and challenge this group of thought leaders that are here today. Today, we have two groups in particular that are following this session, that are the climate shapers from our bootcamp that we co-organized together with FAO, but also the youth participating in the journey of Bites for Transformation, organized by the Swiss representative at the FAO, IFA. Then PO is going to tell us more probably afterwards. So I want to first of all invite in this virtual stage with me the first conversation starter. And I want to start from the starting point of the chain. And I want to invite Arne Cartridge. He is a special advisor, and you can turn on your camera so you can jump on stage with me. Okay, perfect. Thank you. He is a special advisor on sustainable development, heading up global initiatives in many different parts of the world. He has a very long experience. He has been working with the major industries, but also super connected really with the ground, with the place where people are, say, producing probably the biggest commodity that every single day arrives on our table, where actually there are the origins of the inequalities that we see at the end, because sometimes we don't pay and we don't see the true cost of the food we are eating. He is a part of Yara International and many other very important initiatives. So I would love really, Arne, to start to light up the first chapter of this journey.
Thanks, Sarah, and just to add a little bit on, and thanks for that introduction. So I've been kind of the last 20 years or so been going back and forth between the private sector and as you say, working with many years with Yara, which is a huge fertilizer input company, but also then working with the World Economic Forum and the UN on setting up something called Grow Africa, so very much on how to, and I was also initiating what is today the African Green Revolution Forum, which is the main convening on African food and agriculture. I was also part of setting up the Food and Land Use Coalition, and at the moment I'm helping to coordinate and lead on something called the Imagine Food Collective, which brings the whole from the retailers all the way back to the input companies and seeing how we can help mobilize and shift these companies more quickly into kind of a new paradigm. But so let me just share, a few reflections, and I think starting at this from two ends, how we produce and what we eat, because I think those are the two key questions that we need to ask ourselves, and we probably should look at these at least from kind of three areas. One is, how do we make our food systems climate and nature positive? How do we ensure, as you said, Sarah, earlier on, the social equity, the livelihoods, but also the food affordability. And then lastly, looking at the health aspects, and health is obviously very, nutrition and all of these aspects of health, but it's also the health cost because of all the externalities that is linked to food and agriculture. So I think that's kind of, at least for me, and what's happened over the last, I would say, 10 years is that there's been from a very fragmented way of looking at food and agriculture, very siloed, everybody sitting on their own sector or part of the value chain, and also not really fully recognizing, even if sustainability has been around for quite some time and since the early 90s with the Rio conference and so on. But it was really, I would say, over the last 5 to 10 years that one really getting a more systems understanding and seeing how things are, fully interrelated, and the need and requirement to solve this as a full food value chain. And if you take from the, after the Second World War, the paradigm that was developed was very much around yield, and yield as food security, efficiency, and affordability, if you like. So bringing down the cost of the price of food. And you could say somehow that, that paradigm has been delivered upon, but over time we somehow lost the way, and the externalities, either that is to nature or the consequences on climate, or that is, as I said, all the smallholders who's kind of lost out on the opportunities, or the health aspects, so the diets that we have today in parts of the world, which is not sustainable nor healthy. And I think that you will find different perspectives on this within the private sector and the food value chain, but I think it's quite commonly understood that the system is broken, if you like. We need to change, we need to shift, and we need to transform. And as I said, with Sarah earlier this week, is that somehow we could say we have 9 seasons in front of us to change this. And I think that's something that needs to sink in, because at least in the Northern Hemisphere, where you normally have 1 season, how do you change farming? And how do you change what is asked of farmers? And how is the support system or the incentive mechanisms, or what is the demand side all the way down to the consumer? Because that's, I think, what we, and that is quite a tall order, because it means that the way things are traded, sourced, produced, and what we in the end, eat on our plate every day is critical. And then back to kind of what you said on COVID, because I would say that a crisis should be used. It's also, it is a crisis in itself, but it's always also an opportunity. But then it's an opportunity if you use this as a wake-up call. And I think if you look at the climate crisis, it's much more of a slow-moving development. The COVID, when it hit back in February, March last year, it was an immediate wake-up call, especially in parts of Europe when it was. And I think that we should use that lesson to really understand what we have in front of us and what trajectory we are on if we don't change it quite dramatically in the coming, say, 10 years. I think the other thing which makes this also even more challenging and complex is that this year we will see more people falling back into poverty. We will have an increased unemployment in many parts of the world. We will have increased food insecurity. And that at the time because changing the food system will most likely come with, at least initially, with increased cost. If you look at, say, the production systems, and we say that we need to build improved soil health, sequester more carbon in soils, shift to regenerative practices. And that means quite a major shift for farmers. And in the first kind of seasons for these farmers, it will be increased cost. Who picks up that cost? Yes, there might be inefficiencies in the value chain. There might be certain things that should be challenged on the companies. But at the end of the day, it's also something that might be on consumers or governments. How do we repurpose subsidies? The CAP reform in Europe is one key discussion that is ongoing these days. So to understand the real cost, the externalities of food, or the value of food, but how do we make the right type of food available, affordable, and how do we do it in a way that becomes fair and equitable in the value chain between the producers, the farmers, either they are smallholders or family farms, or those are workers in the supply chain, or for the consumers, those who are going to buy food every day, that they can have access to the right food at an affordable price. And I think this is, I'll probably stop there for now, but I think those are so how do we shift the paradigm? How do we do that within 9 seasons? And how do we do it in a way that is equitable, at the same time delivers food security and the right nutrition and health. So I'll stop there, Sarah, if that's okay for you for now.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I have to acknowledge that from when we met last week, I started not telling anymore that we have a decade ahead, but I'm only talking about the 9 agricultural season ahead, that I think from a communication perspective is framing really well that we don't have time. Even more if we consider that the data we are relying on now are old, because a paper that has been published by Nature last week is showing that the data we are relying on are 5 years old. So now it's like being in 2025.
Yeah.
So
Okay, can I just give a comment, because I think what is obviously not there yet, or at least not there yet with many of those who can really make things happen, is the sense of urgency. But at the same time, we also need to somehow recognize that we are, the food systems around the world is probably one of the most complex things that we can take on.
absolutely.
So it's also, how do we really unpack that, and how do we get down to kind of it's almost like, what are the nuts and bolts to do this, and how do we do it right, and how do we do it fast?
We will try to deep dive on that today. And now I would love, thank you so much, Arne. You have been talking about poverty, but the issue that Mark is facing every single day were there also yesterday and the day before. Of course, now everything has been accelerated and the problem are even tougher and the people in need are even more. And overall, we are all getting sick also from the social perspective, the mental perspective, and food, we strongly believe, can be a power to heal the community. But then, Mark, I think it's interesting to add your perspective to this conversation.
Thank you. And I'm super energized by Arne's prompts. And so I want to start with acknowledging that I am on the traditional and unceded territories of the Squamish, Snohomish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and that we are all on somebody's indigenous land, and they are the rightful land owners. When we're talking about agriculture, they all had it right. So we can look to our ancestors to know how we go forward. It's a really important differentiation when we're like, nobody ever knew how to do this. We definitely do. I own an 11-acre farm amongst all my other businesses, which work in social impact. And that farm grows a tremendous amount of food all year round, regardless of the seasons, because we have technology around hothouses, right? So when we think about what we're doing production-wise, and I am going to go into the heart-led work in a moment, but the numbers just come to the top of my head every time, which is on 1 acre of land, 1 acre, we can produce over 50,000 pounds of fresh food a year. 1 acre, right? A lot of people on a 1/4 acre in their house or in their backyard or their front yard can produce enough food for them and their neighbors. We've just forgotten how. 90 million acres are used to produce corn. A lot of that corn just goes into cattle feed. Those two contributing factors should be a very big concern for us. 26% of the non-ice covered land on the planet is used for livestock. 26% of it is used for livestock. 1 billion people on the planet are obese. They're obese. And when I did a dinner in 2017 called the Laudato Si Challenge that Pope Francis put together, I flew to Rome and I did this dinner, and I got to spend time with Cardinal Peter Turkson. And he said to me, our failures are that we overconsume and that we don't share the gifts of creation, right? So when we realize that 1 billion people are obese, it's an insane amount of people to be overweight. And that number tripled from 75 up until now. And then we also realize that in this moment, since we've been talking, 625 people approximately to this minute have died from starvation. And Sarah, when you and I addressed the UN last year when we were working on the creation of National Food Waste or International Food Waste Day, it's on September 29th, I started my address with, we've all been sitting here introducing ourselves and we have no idea how urgent this problem is. And 1,642 people had died by that point, just in the session that we've been sitting in. Now we know, we are told that we also waste a billion pounds of food a year. I challenge that number consistently. I think it's 3 times that much when we consider all of the different chains. So while I like to talk about it, what I like way more is to do stuff about it. And I like to create archetypes and businesses that show us the way. So for the last 15 years, I've worked as a ground level businessman. I am a chef. I'm a professor and an educator in innovation dynamics and design thinking. And those two things are critical to interweave when we think about solutions. We know how to procure, produce, and what the system looks like. And we also know what the larger system of poverty and the issues that we're facing look like. And so about 2 blocks from here, we produce 1,000 meals a day. We've been doing that for almost 8 years. And those 1,000 meals are scratch made. And they employ people who are facing diverse abilities and barriers. Now, it could be a physical or mental diverse ability. It could be recidivism, that they're in and out of jail. It could be street entrenchment. It could simply feel like it's not enough and they're not enough. We need more qualified people in food production. There is a global shortage of qualified chefs because we don't give enough value to food and we overconsume. We expect everything for a little. So in those 1,000 meals, we incorporate everybody. Indigenous farmers, regional people, producers of honey, producers of coffee. We look to everybody who is creating an upwardly mobile system that is employing people out of abject poverty so they're not starving or not wondering where their next meal is coming from, like a good chunk of the world is right now. It is all completely unnecessary. And we always say poverty is an act of violence. It's an act of violence. We choose to participate in poverty by ignoring the systems that create it. So while we produced these 1,000 meals in June, after being prompted by Sarah to join her in Pollica, Italy, at the UNESCO Heritage Site where we talked about the Mediterranean diet, while we were doing that, she reminded me about all the stuff we had done with food waste. And I was like, what am I doing about food waste? You know, we have 8 different types of compost bins. We're zero waste. Nothing leaves our building but boiled bone. Like, we really, really do it. But what could we do more? So I partnered with 2 local grocery stores, one super high end, one middle of the road. And we started to send electric tricycles to them every single day. And they gave us all of their waste. Prepackaged sushi containers, muffins, pizza crusts, you name it, all came to the building. And since June, we've been able to reconstitute and redistribute 6 million tons of food, which has kept approximately 16,000 kilograms of carbon out of the atmosphere by keeping that out of landfill. This isn't complicated. And I think that we overcomplicate this stuff every day. Like, oh, this is so complicated. It's not. It's very, very simple. People need work. People are hungry. There's more than enough food to go around that's going in the garbage. How do we put it back together? We don't just talk about it, we do it, and we show people. So the idea being that we can get people who are facing abject poverty into meaningful employment to help save the lives, literally, of the people who are also facing abject poverty. And that with this, the strain that it puts on governments and on taxation dollars to have people in poverty is generally 3 to 6 times more in dollar figures than it would be to look after them. Those are real numbers. We choose poverty with our tax dollars and who we put into office. And so let me just get really clear on that and just double click on it really quickly. It is 2 to 6 times more expensive to keep someone street entrenched without mental health assistance or any other services than it is to house them and give them 360 services. That's data. It's not maybe, it's not an assumption. It's hard data. San Francisco, Vancouver, New York. We do the work on all sides of the border. And we have to change our perspective that this is that difficult. We have 3 or 4 or 5 large organizations destroying our planet. When you talk about those 9 to 13 harvests, depending on what side you're sitting on, they're doing it. We know exactly who is responsible. We also know that that food is poisoning people. Heart disease, diabetes, cancer. It's responsible directly for people's health. So these are not solutions that are escaping us and what would we ever do? We know what to do. We just won't call it out and do it. And so I think we love the work that we do. We love the people we're able to serve. We're just about to crack 3 million meals served here in Vancouver. We're teaching digitally during the time of COVID and delivering groceries to BIPOC families in Brownsville, Harlem, in Oakland, and San Francisco, focusing on teaching kids between 7 and 12 years old. I'm absolutely in love with the work, but I really want to challenge us to say, oh, it's too big for us, because it's not. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Mark. So I strongly feel the sense of urgency we have. And I would love now to invite Pio to help me to connect the dots. We strongly believe that all the points that have been raised until now are crucial. And it seems a huge, massive problem to face and so many challenges and so many goals to achieve. We all know that 2021 is going to be a crucial year. The United Nations announced the big UN Food Systems Summit really to raise the attention on the issue and try to say accelerate the changes that are needed. We also know that many different big relevant stakeholder, decision maker, world's leader can be and must be part of this change. And Pio, I want to leave to you this last inspiration to really facilitate this conversation that is going to follow.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for giving me. I'm feeling humbled and honored, seriously, to try to connect dots. I don't know if there are dots to connect, but definitely there is something that Mark said that is for me it's very important to maybe underline when talking about inequalities and food related to inequalities. The first that Mark is talking is about both a collective and personal responsibility. There are two elements that are important there. There is something we can actually do as people, but there is something that we have to do as a societies as well. And one, the moving of the people is going to trigger the change of the other. The other message that is given, and I think this for me is important, I like it very much, is that it's doable. It's not impossible. It's not just, it's over, okay? But there is maybe a way in order to exactly to think a bit future, or to think how we can take experiences like the Mark ones, there are several others around the world, to bring them up to scale, is to being capable to project ourselves into a maybe a little bit more distant future. This is helping us to drop fear and suffering, maybe, that are related to the fact that we don't know whether we can do it. But sometimes projecting yourself into the future can be helpful. So talking about inequalities, what I would like to use as a quality indicator that both includes this collective and personal responsibilities about social determinants of health related to food. Because actually, if you look at social determinants of health, this means basically your health at entry before the health system takes care or doesn't take care of you according to where you are and your capacities to, in some places, to support and to finance your own health care. But the entry point, this is key. And this is what we have to follow in the future, that while assuring that we save the planet, that we will look and see that the social determinants of health are less and less unequal. Because the social determinants of health include both, are related, when we talk about food, is related about consumption. And there is the number of examples. So we are talking about who is starving, but also about who is obese. It's an element of social determinants of health also, because obesity in several parts of the world, in the past, it used to be related to growth of income. In many cases now, it's not linked to growth of income. It's because junk food is the only thing that is affordable. And then there is a big marketing around it as well, that makes that in several areas of the world where we would not have imagined that we could have obesity, now we have it. But it's part of the determinants of health as well. It's before what are the conditions that make that you can become obese. But then there are the determinants of health that are related to, if you are living in an environment where the water is polluted, the air is polluted, everything is polluted, because maybe also because of the way we produce, the way we use water, the way we reinject water into the system, that makes that our health is already put in difficulties because simply of conditions where we're living, related also to the food system that changed. Therefore, I think this indicator is a good one to follow the issues on inequalities related to food. Now, concretely speaking, what in the Food System Summit, where frankly speaking, it's complex, and then we've been discussing with Sarah and others, and there is it could be that at the end we could end up with a status quo, because there's forces going completely different directions in relation to a complex system like food are very strong, very powerful. And therefore, you know, when you pull in different direction, at the end, if you do it with equal force, you don't move. And this is a risk. And one of the reasons why we set up like this small project, which is a small project, Bites of Transformation, is we are supporting a group of 50 or 60 young people that are, some of them entrepreneurs, they're from different activities. Some of them are researchers, chefs, related to the food system, farmers, traditional farmers, less traditional farmers, people producing food from insects, or from industries producing vitamins. So all this group together, we are trying to create a kind of a safe space in order to help them to project themselves into a future, where the determinants of health could be taken care, there is a plausibility that things could get better, even by using the most modern knowledge. So I had a discussion with the former chief of sustainability of Nestlé some time ago, that he was saying, okay, we were discussing about personalized diets for refugee camps. we think that is something completely that doesn't make sense. I mean, who knows? Maybe it makes sense, instead of just transporting rice or raw material to a refugee camp. Maybe there is a way to do it better, targeted. Because why? Because there will be refugee camps in 20 years. Also, they will not be over. So the plausibility, what we are trying to help with this group is to look into a future where there is a plausibility that things could change. And then from there, go back and say, how can we do it in the best way that we reduce inequalities while in the same time assuring that we sustain the planet and the future. Just as a small input. Thank you.
Now I would love to know which are the obstacles, and I would love to remove the obstacles that are actually on our way. Carlo.
Thank you, Sarah. By chance, our three conversation starters, it was good they were surrounded by you, but they were all men, and they have given us a wonderful initial contribution. I would like now just to ensure we have a thorough and all the colors of the conversation. I'd like to invite three women, if possible, to get us started. Silvia, Joyce, and Beatrice, if you are okay, and take the conversation from here with your own thoughts. So please, if you can put your video on, Silvia, Joyce, and Beatrice, and then from now on, anybody who want to intervene into the conversation, please just put your video on, and that's the way the fishbowl will go. So either in the conversation they can put their video off as they have finished their intervention. Thank you, Silvia, and welcome. I invite again, if possible, Beatrice and Joyce, yes, to also have your video on. And And the floor is yours with your thoughts. You're all muted, please.
Now.
Good.
Now, here we go. I'm in a very dark place, so please excuse me. I hope you hear me well. I was paying close attention to what we were just discussing, and I was giving a thought to what they just said about the refugee camp and the personalized nutrition, which I think is a bit extreme. But a thought came to mind. We have been talking about food safety, and I think we should start talking about nutrition safety, because as we've seen, food is getting more and more accessible to everyone. And in fact, in some places we have too much bad food, and therefore that obesity rate. So what do we do to guarantee not only food safety, but also nutrition safety is a thought we should also speak about. And then a second thing Mark also mentioned, he was starting to talk about the economic sense related to solving some of these issues. So I was thinking about the diet we are following. So a diet that is better for the planet is also better for health. And we know that health-related diseases cause a very severe cost to public administrations. So if we make public administrations aware about the amount of money they could save by pushing forward these sustainable and healthy diets, maybe they would be more incentivized to do so, because as we said, there is a cost someone has to bear. But if someone sees the value in bearing that cost on a medium term, maybe they would start to do it. I see Sylvia is around.
Yeah. Hello to everyone. It's my pleasure to be here tonight, this afternoon, and join your conversation. So from my point of view, what I think is really making a difference is that the pandemics has been a wake-up call for everyone. I think no one, let us think about last year, no one would expect it, such a global disaster and such a global crisis to happen. So I guess it's an opportunity, and we should take it, the good from the crisis, in order to see what steps should be taken in order to establish a more sustainable and more resilient, because I think resilience is one of the key words here. So the food system should be made more resilient. People should become more resilient to health crisis and economic crisis. So the question about who will bear the cost of this pandemic, I think it's a crucial one. And I think that especially in Europe, governments and political leaders are asking themselves the same question. So what would be the best strategies, where to start from? And I guess that probably the answers are quite simple. If the political will is there, we can start by introducing regenerative farming, climate smart agriculture, reduce food loss and waste across the whole food supply chain. Keep in mind the environmental and market trade-offs when we think about possible solutions to enhance a sustainable food system. So I think it's more than just a solution. It's a change of, it's a wheel of interconnected solutions that need to take place. And yeah, I think rebooting the future is the only chance we had, and we shouldn't really miss the opportunity to collaborate. Because as Steve was mentioning, as Stephen Finn was mentioning in the chat, I think collaboration is probably the key here. More than ever, collaboration among institutions, among governments, among international organizations must be enhanced. And research has to play a role in that. We need more data, we need more figures in order to better understand what is happening in the world today. So.
Yeah. The thing is that data is there for us to use. If we think about, for example, the center of the genome in China, now we can sequence the genome at a price that we could have never imagined before. So I think we also have to support all of this and all of this change with the innovation that is already available. And we have many challenges. So we have to get much better at growing more on less land. So how do we do this? There are so many mechanisms we can now do this. For example, with hydroponics, but that is just one of the solutions. But we already have so many. For example, CRISPR technology. We are seeing this year the Nobel Prize went to CRISPR technology. And now with gene editing, we can really control what we are growing and maybe do it in a way that really feeds the planet. It's just a matter of the will, as you said, more than the tools. And as we are all agreeing here, it's a doable challenge we can face. It's a matter of will and of facing this issue in with a view of humanity, not nation based.
Yeah, I would like to point out something, because I realize since Mark pointed out the importance of collective intelligence, obviously during this crucial moment, but I also see the importance of applying this collective intelligence, obviously into the food system, but as well as decolonizing our paradigms. I know we are talking a lot about technology, is very fundamental, but I also believe in social technology, in ancestral technology, because, sorry, but again, as an indigenous person, sometimes people refer us as we are in a museum, we are something from the past. But okay, let me remind you, we have been, especially in the Americas, doing a resistance process for over 500 years. So we know how to work with resilience. We know how to take care of the land. And there are some ideas, some perspectives, especially back at home. My family, my mom lives in the Amazon. And as Sylvia was saying, that we didn't imagine the like this change that we'll have during this year and the crisis. However, the fight that we are having is being years ago, especially with agrochemicals and agrotoxics, and as well the sovereignty with the lands. So we know we have these techniques from the past. So why don't we not just recycle, but retake and reapply ancestral technology? So I studied techno-shamanism, which is this mixture of not just ancestral, but practices that had worked out somehow, not just with low tech, but also with different methods, and try to apply them to this new future that we are walking towards. So I believe also, I see that we do have genetic technology. However, we also have agroforestry, as you were talking about, restorative agriculture. And just to finish, last year, well, where I live is in Foz do Iguaçu, the border of Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. We had huge issues with agrochemicals in our water. The government, I'm not going to talk about Brazilian government because you all know the reality about it. So we could not wait for anything from the government. So what we started organizing communities to use places that were polluted or that were community owned. So we started creating agroforestry communities, mutirões, like planting together. And somehow we see, as Mark said, the land, Pachamama's land, it gives us a lot of products. So we had to organize circles of distribution. So we came out with several social, organic entrepreneurship ideas. And they have changed, they have moved into permaculture, into many things, but it's how, as well as communities, we organize, and we have these local perspectives. You know, you were talking at the beginning about the SDGs, and so, yeah, we do have an agenda. However, the change has to be local. So yeah, just decolonize the paradigm of development as well. What actually means development into the food system. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. It was very, very insightful. And thinking about Brazil, we recently ran or are still running a research initiative about nutrition for all, and we managed to invite almost 100 people to different dinners in 6 different countries. And we mentioned intelligence and literacy. And I think education indeed is very important. And we mentioned how important it is to educate younger generation. Now, on these dinners, we also identified that the younger generations are not making their own food choices. And that also means that we have to teach mothers, the female population, and also all of the other parental roles, because at the end of the day, they are making the food choices for a decent time, and especially when all of the palatability is developed for the new generation. So food access equals affordability, availability, and acceptability as well. So now if from a younger age, you haven't even had the chance to develop your tastes and everything for healthy and nutritious food, how do we expect you to actually change your diet?
Love that, Julia, and I love all the comments about will and education. And I think about this in terms of leadership right now. And there's that theme of, if not me, who, and if not now, when, right? And I think we need leadership on these issues more than ever. And I think the leadership needs to be from a basis of caring, right? So, in my country, we've just gone through this period of, putting our country first, right? And that's been the mantra of the last 4 years. And, that's only exacerbated this period of nationalism and isolationism around the world. And, it's exacerbated the tensions, I think, that led to the very mass migrations that we saw 4 to 5 years ago that I think were underpinned by the sustainability challenges coming from the problems of the food system. So I think going forward, as we reimagine, we really need to, keep in mind that, all these critical SDG themes that are, at the heart of the food system challenges that we have are all related to, global security, which is all related to, making a better world for all of us, right? And so they can't be separated. So I think this focus on national policies that emphasize our countries first just creates schisms between nations, and they remove the incentive for this global collaboration that we need, that really the SDGs were designed to achieve. And I'm really concerned about this leadership void that we've had over the last 4 or 5 years. And as Sylvia says, let's look at this as an opportunity, look at the crisis as an opportunity to move forward. So my framing on this is, we, rather than putting our countries first, we step back and we consider prioritizing humanity first. And if we do that together, we can really accelerate the potential for collaboration to drive meaningful change forward.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. I want to pick up on that. I think I totally agree with you that it's about leadership. I also think it's very much personal as a choice, and I want to kind of like touch back on what Mark was saying, because I think it's a tricky part also given our research and the research we find around, which is, yes, every small action counts. At the same time, where is the limit? Because what research finds is that for everybody is not enough. So my step is too big to actually make a difference. So how can you actually, I don't know, get to this feeling that it is enough? Like, how can we give each of us and people in general this feeling? And talking about communities, and Joyce was saying, I want to throw this in the pot, which is more about cooperative. And Julia is here, and I would love then to hear also your opinion, Julia, in terms of like co-ownership models that can fight isolation, as Steve was mentioning, inequality, but also can make probably everybody, both on the worker side and on the consumer side, feeling that they're actually making an impact, because there is a different perception in terms of the result of each action. So I'm curious to hear what the fishbowl thinks about co-ownership models and cooperative as a tool to actually fight the issues that we have been talking about.
it's Julia, then you go. You want to go?
Okay, whatever you prefer, you go.
It's a funny coincidence, actually. I have this jam. It's made by a cooperative in Eastern Bosnia. And there's a woman who's been basically trying to fight victims of war in that region through this cooperative of jams. And that's the only conversation that comes to my mind that I had with this woman who, because there are a lot of paradoxes when we talk about power in the food system and what power means and what poverty means and how it's disbalanced. And cooperatives, this cooperative especially, seems like an example that they're trying to repopulate the war-stricken areas by this mission and giving employment to people, and also like giving them help, mental support through this cooperative and a collective mission to go forward. I would be also curious to see and hear what you guys think about these power imbalances that we see today in the food system, especially because like the idea of what's ideal for the Western world and what's ideal for the underprivileged part of this world is so different. She was telling me an example of how families come together to make these jams, and there are like little girls helping to put the labels. And so she was telling me that how each product is not packaged, but it's dressed by hand by us. And there were some NGOs from the privileged world telling them that, but this is child labor. And she was a bit like shocked because she said like, I don't know how to answer. And that's kind of like a paradox, I think. How do we face these issues differently is also quite interesting as a theme to think about. And she felt that she was giving everyone a mission, and it was really like a family coming together to repopulate this land. And so, yeah, Julia, what do you think about cooperatives as a solution?
Funny you ask. As Professor Klosse already heard twice this week, I'm part of a team called Supercoop here in Berlin. We are trying to open the very first member-owned supermarket here. We have been running our pilot since June in the form of a buyer club, and we do believe in the power of cooperatives, because on this way, all of the members and so the shoppers, we have a say in what lands on the supermarket shelf. We have way more knowledge accessible for them about the food, the origin of the food, how the food was prepared. And we really hope that with the model, also the affordability of food will be different. Now, our climate, these models are already existing in New York, in France, and very interesting what you said about local context. We have to have a completely different value proposition here in Berlin, because in Germany, people famously spend very little amount of their income on their food, thanks to the beautiful discounter paradise here. And it's not the problem of not having food. I have alone around my house 6 supermarkets, from organic to discounters. So it's not about the access to food, it's access to quality and nutritious food. And how do you also bring in the community element? All of our members so far, so we reached around like 150 members by now, they come back even when the location is far away from their home, because they want to be part. They want to be part of this community. They want to be part of a movement which is trying to source better food for them.
If I may, then I can add to it, and also add to the issues raised by Javi and Julia. Cooperative must work, especially when the transparency, also the profits are equally distributed, because one of the problems now is, of course, that these discounters do sell us food, but the farmer doesn't get anything. And the important thing is that farmers also should be a part of the system and should earn from what they do. And the next thing in added value clearly must be a very important part of change. And Sarah also raised the question, how do we how do we get away from obstructions, and how do we get change happening? And one of the easy things, like Mark, I fully agree with Mark as well, should be the solutions should be simple, should be understood by people that understand what needs to be done and should profit from it. And then one of the most important added values is I tend to start thinking it must be the elephant in the room, because I hardly ever hear people talk about the essence of our food, and that's taste. And if foods are really tasty and convenient and affordable, that CAT or CAT approach, then things are let's say, accessible and tasty. And if foods are very tasty and people can afford them, then of course you don't mind buying it. So tasty is a very important force. The jam that Xavi introduced is a good jam when we like it and when we buy it. And when we buy it, then the community and the cooperative works. So the importance for me is to keep it simple, to keep it small, to keep it with people that profit from it. And as soon as we have many circles of people that profit, then the things get better and things will change for the better. So simple, like Mark said, education, knowing how, these are important things and often overlooked. So it's important for the discussion, I believe, to add that.
Yeah, I think I just want to make a comment on the point on cooperatives. In my experience, cooperatives are really essential, certainly for smallholder farmers in developing countries, in order to get scale and a better negotiating position towards multinational corporations or the buyers, basically. So I think cooperatives are truly essential in order for them to have a livelihood. And there was a point made earlier on child labor. In our experience, I mean, one of the root causes of child labor is often the lack of sufficient income for smallholder farmers. And again, their cooperatives are the key. One point I just want to make on somebody was talking about leadership earlier on. And I think, one of the things, at least in my experience, what we have learned from the COVID crisis is that there is a sort of a regained trust in science, I would say, and in some countries also in governments. And certainly in Western Europe, you see the ratings for trust in governments going up. You see the ratings of trust in science going up. And I think these are the learnings we need to try and apply also for the climate crisis, for example. And the question is mainly, how can we get the same sense of urgency for climate as we had for the corona crisis? And that, I think, is still difficult to achieve. But that, for me, is a key thing to get society moving.
I'm sorry if I may jump in. I don't know if you can see me, but talking about cooperative, by my experience, I work in development cooperation. My background is in agronomy. And I bring in the fishbowl 2 examples of cooperatives that we have set up. One was in Iraq and one in Syria. In Iraq, we were talking, and I was coordinating this program about olive oil in the north, in Kurdistan region, where apparently there are forests and genetical heritage, which is from millenniums of years ago. And so the problem was there to create a value chain from scratch, from the nursery, production, and in the fields, processing, and the market, and the final market. And the cooperative, forming a cooperative in Erbil and giving them the chance to have like a proper olive mill to process the olives was the key elements of the success of the project. But going back a little bit to Joyce and to other interventions, it's not always like going backwards is the future, because in places worn torn by years of war, and they have lost everything, even their heritage in knowing how to do agriculture in a way, or by bad practices that were bad politics from the government. So in that case, you said before, taste is the element. They were producing one of the best oil, even in Italy. I'm coming from the south, from the province of Lecce. We're producing olives and olive oil since always. But even the taste there was the best one, but the consumer, they didn't know what to do with this oil because they had it, but I'm talking about 2,000 years ago and not now. The same was in Syria, income generation activities for women about processing. The women, they really got a successful initiative by being all together. But the men were scared about buying because you know that there is this social inequality between men and women, where a woman should be at home and the man should be out and work. So 2 examples about cooperatives and a little bit of some paradigm talking about food system.
Hi, everyone. If it's okay, I will pick up on that and on what Costantino was just saying. I think it is very important to stress once again that also Western countries have a huge problem in production, and in our food systems in Europe are not sustainable in terms of climate change related issues, and they're not sustainable for most of people, the majority of people that work are landed work in the fields. I personally was really shocked at the beginning when I realized that food in Europe has such a history of violence and oppression for the most. But I think it is essential for us as consumers, but also as citizens, also politically, to engage in this conversation and trying to ask ourselves, why does our food system rely on exploitation, and what can we do to change it? In the sense, I think we have to realize and we have to acknowledge that our food systems for the most, and also our economic systems for the most, rely on cheap and disposable labor force. So something has to change within our economic systems if we want workers' rights, so farmers' rights in this context, to be respected. I think this really brings together a lot of things that we have been saying today, because if we don't respect people that are harvesting our food, they're growing our food, and in the same sense, like if we don't break the power relationships between countries and we stop giving for granted that non-Western countries have to grow our food, and we start, asking ourselves, are economic system sustainable? Thank you.
Thanks. I'll step in and thanks everyone for a rich and really insightful discussion. I just want to pick up on a few things and thanks to Mark, inspirational, and I think you started off some of those, and others have alluded to it, but I think the whole kind of, you could call it bottom up, community, citizens giving voice, grassroots, entrepreneurs, cooperatives, and I fully agree. I think this is something we just need to give more attention to, more power to, and it's fully required, because without humans willing to change and taking on and leading that change, it will not happen. But I think we also, because there is so much vested interest, power, existing structures that also deliver certain things that citizens are dependent upon. Just take what it was just the letter just talked about Europe. The CAP discussions, and we need to repurpose subsidies so they are better fit for what incentivizing a better way of producing. But farmers don't want to change the CAP. So how do you get so we need to look at existing, either that is in the private sector or in governments, but how we change and shift existing systems, and to do it in a way that is in the best service both of nature as well as for us humans. And then I think I just want to share some kind of dilemmas, because I don't think there's any silver bullet. On land, you could look at two kind of approaches. One is land sparing, and that means that you actually try to produce as efficiently and as much as possible in a certain limited area, so you can free up land and restore it back to nature and reforest. Or you could do land sharing in a way that you actually do agroforestry and do much more biodiversity at your farm, but you most likely will have then it's kind of part of the yield part, So these are things we need to get more science, more understanding, and also I think a very honest discussion that needs to be science-based, but seeing what is optimal in what parts of the world and what part of your own country, etc. Then a couple of other quick reflections. I think one is that there is an existing and in growing urban-rural divide, and as we're heading towards 60 to 70% of world population living in cities, how do we, so can we slow down that shift or that urbanization, and how do we actually ensure that we address that urban-rural divide, and also that is also on the equity and etc. on the poverty side. I think another one which is between, if you look at especially India and Africa, which will have the highest population growth going forward. I mean, already today, 60% of the African population is below the age of 25. And they're totally food import dependent. At the same time, India and Africa is going to be those two continental countries that is most impacted by climate change. So the hot planet will really impact parts of Africa and India. And that will impact food production, but it also be more vulnerable people. So how do we also take on these things in a way that, and that will require more than just a bottom up, that will require kind of the global, power structure and community coming together and really addressing this. So I'll stop there for now, but those were kind of reflections from me on the discussion as it's shaping up.
Yeah, just to build on a couple of those points and tie some of those together, I think macro level changes and policy level changes. I think, and the point just made about the percentage of population coming from Africa going forward. I've been thinking a lot lately about this, this concept of pushing sustainability initiatives. Not only through global supply chains, but also across nations. And I think Sarah made a comment at the start about the importance of SDG 17 and the importance of partnerships. And I think about that in terms of technology transfer and asset transfer and capital transfer to help accelerate this change for sustainable development. And I've been struck by the World Resources Institute's 10-20-30 initiative, which is designed to have 10 global food retailers partner with 20 of their global suppliers to cut food loss and waste in half by 2030. And I think that's a great model. And to the point about changing paradigms before and respecting cultural differences, I think, if you think about that in terms of developed and developing countries and accelerating sustainable development, maybe we can think about this in terms of the concept of 30 of the most developed countries helping the 160 or so less developed countries advance as much as possible by 2050. So maybe we call that the 30 by 160 by 2050 initiative. But this point about again collaboration and a focus on, we really need to focus on bringing the developing world along quickly if we're going to meet these challenges. And again, this all in my mind comes back to global security. So such a role for technology transfer, knowledge transfer, infrastructure transfer, all of that.
You are muted, Arne.
Okay, sorry. Just one quick illustration on some of the challenges we, as we kind of shifted a little bit to Africa. But if rice, so especially Western Africa, the diet is so rice is the kind of the staple, but they're totally dependent upon imports. And even if you try to stimulate by governments and donors and private companies the rice production in West Africa, but it's not competitive. It's much cheaper for these countries to import rice from Asia. So how do we shift that in a way that these farmers that can produce rice, if that is what the consumers really or the local population really to eat, but And that takes, a concerted effort by many stakeholders, because otherwise, and I know that, there are people who's been really trying this for many, many years, and it's extremely slow to shift. And it just illustrates a little bit of the difficulty sometimes where, the solutions are quite obvious, but to make them happen is not that always that easy.
May I jump on something that you mentioned before now about the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy in Europe? I mean, accessing the land as used. I graduated in agricultural science and technology, and what I wanted to be is a farmer, okay? And I didn't have a farm. I wanted to go back in my roots place, which is Puglia, and start doing something. My mission, I wanted to do pomegranates and olives. Of course, we have now a huge tragedy, which is Xylella fastidiosa is destroying all the olive trees in the south of Italy. But I did everything that I could to attend, the money from the European community that is, for the youth and, regenerating agriculture in Europe. But it's difficult and it's not easy. And in particular, because we are in Italy and stuff is going a little bit more slowly, it is so difficult to access that funds and to have land on which to work, to create a business on agriculture. And as me, so many friends as mine wanted to do something, but bureaucracy was insane. And you had to ask at the end of banks, and you had to ask the signature of your father. But what if your father wouldn't allow you, wouldn't give you the signature on spending 100 or 150,000 euro to build up something from scratch? No. So the CAP, what you were suggesting before, should be reformulated for the youth and for the young people, because it's not working until now.
And I wonder, I mean, on one side, Mark, as well, I wonder, so we have somebody like Yunus a few years ago. He gifted us with this realization that actually microfinancing can happen, can be real, can be a viable solution. And does anybody have an experience with applying microfinancing in the space of agriculture and food production in emerging countries, let's say, as we call them, but let's say in countries where you might not need 100K to get started, maybe you might need less than that. And if this is a viable solution, or at the moment is just a theoretical, is still unfortunately a theoretical exercise.
If I may, from the experience you're talking about microfinance, what we were using in Iraq and in Syria, what we were seeing before is granting. Big organizations are granting everything: seeds, fertilizers, pests and disease, but this is not something sustainable, because it's vicious for who is getting this point. So we started up with something that is not new, but it's kind of innovative on how we applied in the development program, which is cost recovery. It's called even revolving fund. It's not all, I'm giving you the credit and then I would love to have it back. But we are giving 70%, of 100 is the price, 30% is the grant. So it's what we take from donors internationally, and 70% is the percentage that the farmer or the breeder is paying to the project to have fertilizer, seeds, fodder, on whatever. And this system of money, which is mainly painful because it's money going in, money going out, it's just a financial system, but it was very successful, because at the end of the 5 years program now in Syria, we were able to reach and to maximize the amount of money given from the donor, from the international donor, and to reach 3 times, 4 times more beneficiaries. So the donor is giving 100, and it will get almost 2.5 times, 3 times more the value of money in compared to what it has been spent. No.
Thanks, Constantino. I just want to add something to your plight and to what a lot of people are seeing, specifically in agriculture. When we took over 11 acres of high value property British Columbia is one of the most desirable locations in the world to buy property. It's recently the third most expensive place for social balance to live in the world. And we took this 11 acres, and to make 11 acres work, to make farming work, we had to think about different ways to manage the property. So we built a brewery on the property, and using the brewery to show other agricultural practices, wastewater, spent hops going into food production, raising chickens, apiary, having honeybees, employing people with developmental delays to actually also access some other granting and support. You have to look at what the new models may be while incorporating the old models to make these things fiscally viable, right? So what are the things that you're going to do or produce around this? We have a market, a community space. We rent the space out for weddings, and we have a community organizer. Every single way you could say you hustle to get it. If you truly care about what it is that you want to enact, you can't look to say the government is responsible for figuring this out. The banks are responsible for figuring this out. They won't unless you choose to take one of those seats. Unless you say, hey, I'm so passionate about this. This didn't work for me. I'm going to go take a seat in that municipal government or in that provincial or federal or state government. I'm going to be the one that then helps people like me in this next generation because it's my responsibility. So taking responsibility for actions and then saying, I can hack this system in a way that I know can support other entrepreneurs. This is build archetypes that other people can see and challenge the provincial government. The last thing I'll say, or the state government or wherever you may be, we changed the law. We were being forced to get evicted off our farm because of this mixed use. And I petitioned ministers, and then we had to use groundswell of popular opinion online, had to get tens of thousands of signatures so we didn't get evicted off of this space. So you have to be willing to challenge the norms, to challenge all of these different things and go directly for the throat of it and say, I'm going to be the one that is going to challenge the system so people come afterwards so it can be viable. But thank you for sharing all that.
Good evening, everybody. I think that microfinance or the personal responsibility just announced are good examples for a larger vision that I will share with you in this fishbowl. Very interesting. Thank you for your intervention. Very, very interesting. In my opinion, I think that one of the most important passage we have to do is to connect people and food, people and supply chain, real people, concrete people, in a double of sense. The first is yes, as probably I don't remember who said, we must be the people aware about the inequality, the violence, the injustice present in the food world. But I think that numbers or statistics are not enough. I think we need more faces, names, stories, places. I was very happy when I listened about Iraqi, Syria, that cooperative, that project, so concrete stories, real stories. If we are able to connect the caution of the people with the real people involved in the food chain, I think we can produce something good. Because we are human, we do not feed, we eat, we cook. This is a cultural event. It's not only a biological event, neither an economical event. So I think we need to produce and to build this connection. At the same time, it's the second connection I would share with you. I think we need to connect together, to put together a humanistic perspective with the economical and technological perspective. Yes, we know we have a lot of data, we have a lot of new technologies, we have a power of technologies, of course, but at the same time, we need to discover, to underline the sense and the opportunities that the new technology can offer to us. So at the table where everyone is invited to share, I think we need to put together different perspectives and different point of view, because we are every models, if you interview, we are able to produce a new models, in my opinion, only from real people, concrete people. Thank you.
Thanks. Excuse me if I take too much of time here, but a couple of things. I think one is, I said earlier, I think it's important to give voice, and I just, two examples. I had the privilege last Friday to speak with two kind of impressive women. So Susie Cameron, who's a kind of an actress and a filmmaker, and she and her husband did the kind of the game changer, who's really targeting men and how to shift diet. So it's on Netflix if you haven't seen it. And the other one, Sue Rockefeller, who helped to produce the Kiss the Ground, which is very much about soil health and regenerative. So those are two films. But I think I'm just using those examples because we need to give, that communication community, get citizens on board for that shift and change is going to be critical. Then just a couple of small comments on the microfinance, which is sometimes a mixed blessing. I was on the board of the humanitarian organization Care International for many years, and we did a lot of work on saving and loan groups for women, and that helped a lot. But then, how do you connect that, what they save together, into microfinance? And the problem often with microfinance is very high interest rates. Okay, if you lend money for a couple of months, that might be okay, but it is not always an easy one, and it's can be quite costly. So one has to kind of look at that very much. And then what one should do is that if we could tie this into an offtake agreement, so if small producers can have an offtake arrangement or help build those channels as a cooperative, then you get some of these things in the right direction, the right motion. Thank you.
Joining the microfinancing part or conversation, I just wanted to highlight one project I learned about recently. It's called Eticab. They're based in Spain, and they use blockchain technology to help investors, but these investors are actually individuals, because the smallest amount that can be invested is actually 20 euros, and then help this money to be given as loans to coffee farmers in Mexico and help them to find new markets, basically. So I will also share the link in the chat. I think that's one of the very great examples of how in very small help can also contribute to agriculture and improvements in global agriculture.
Yes. I would like to reinforce Mark's message with a small story. It's an old one, but still is quite interesting. Being Switzerland, you can imagine Switzerland, the land of everything precise. Can you hear me? It's okay. The story is very short. It's very simple. I used to represent the farmers' unions of southern part of Switzerland, and the farmers are very small. And in general, they are highly subsidized, or they were highly subsidized in order to be sustainable in bracket. And I remember there were coming a group of them that were saying, okay, we would like to do agrotourism because we don't want to be based on subsidies. We just want to do something different. So we went to the authorities, and the authorities say, no, look, the law is not allowing you to do agro-tourism, and we prefer to keep on subsidizing you because anyway you're just a bunch of small farmers there, and for us it's better to subsidize. So they came back to me, and they were very frustrated. Say, what should we do now? I said, no, you do it. You go illegal. You just do it. And then they forced the change. They changed the law. They changed everything. And this is now an important activity that also gives something else than just food. It's a human dimension. It's you are proud about what you're doing now, and this is a big message. Thanks for sharing, Mark.
Well, very interesting conversation. I had two specific thoughts following what everybody was saying. On the microfinancing, just a small thing. I mean, sometimes it can be very simple things as well. In Africa, one experience we had was basically having a tractor being used as an Uber by different farmers. So instead of having microfinancing in the sense of lending people money, you can sometimes also achieve a lot by doing things in kind, whereby people have access to mechanization, for example, on an hourly basis rather than having to buy a tractor for themselves. The other point I want to make is perhaps a more controversial one. There was a bit of discussion about partnerships before. And I think what we need to save the planet is quite disruptive change. And I think partnerships often help also to protect vested interests against change. So I think you need the right kind of partnerships, because partnerships can actually sometimes prevent disruption from taking place. And just think about the car industry as an example. I think without Tesla disrupting the car business, the partnerships between existing companies wouldn't have changed the system as fast as it is changing now. And so there's always a kind of warm feeling about partnerships, but I think we need to be a bit careful, because really what we need to save the planet, as I said before, is disruptive change. And for that, sometimes you need somebody who is the disruptor, and that's not often with partnerships happening.
Yeah, I love that, Hub. And just, I just want to touch on that and Mark's work too, and his action steps and the new things that he created there to survive in a sense. And I just wanted to point out one of the things I'm sensing in conversations of late is, and especially as vaccinations loom on the horizon and we get this hopeful feeling about recovering from the pandemic quickly. I just have this sense that everyone is so thrilled with this potential return to what I'll call the old normal, that we lose sight of what got us to where we are today, right? And so we talked about before that old normal involving these linear business models that produce these externalities that got us here, right? The degradation of soils and deforestation and biodiversity loss and all these things that led to the pandemic. So when I hear that term business as usual, it just terrifies me. So because I think it's just going to return, lead us right back to where we are today. And in a sense, it's the wrong kind of circularity, right? And so I just think as we go forward, emphasize these stories and these new models and new partnership opportunities that you're talking about with a specific focus, that we can't emphasize enough on not returning to business as usual.
Thank you all. Of course, I'm always very inspired hearing all the beautiful projects that are popping up really from the bottom, involving the community and healing the community in some way. But also on the other hand, I'm thinking about the big ones that, of course, are feeding the planet and are still making the big numbers. And I'm wondering, and maybe here, maybe Arne, with Imagine, you are exposed so much to talk with those big leaders, or as well, Chiara, she's working in innovation together with Xavi with the big food industries. How much really these industries can change at the pace we need? Because at the end, if we're thinking also about the CAP in Europe, many things could have been done better. But if we consider from when the CAP came to life in the 70s up to today, of course, the standards in terms of production and the environmental requirements, of course, are growing. So there is anyway something positive out of that. But anyway, Europe is not limiting the import of products that are not following those standards. So of course, we European, we feel we're cool because we have the Green Deal and the farm to fork strategy. But anyway, we're not taking care about the Amazon being killed because of our cows or the cows that we're eating in our country, or anyway, all the commodities that are feeding our industries, European industries. So I feel that we need those small projects keep growing and keep cross-pollinating the world with ideas, but we also need to help the big industries to change really fast. Is this doable?
Yeah.
Sarah,
oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to drop a thought because it really is here. The other day, I saw a friend who works in a pharma company, one of those pharma companies that have, God bless, produced the vaccine, right? And put it in. And there was this big statement where they were saying a process, we made the miracle in 10 months. We transformed the process that would normally take 4 years in 10 months. And I was like, half of me was incredibly upset. And of course, the other half was incredibly happy that this has happened. And then you think, is that really true? Is that what we really need all the time to sparkle that creativity, that productivity, that efficiency, that sense of urgency, that we need the gun on our head to make that happen? And what else do we need to make the food crisis look like a gun on our head? What is that is needed? And it's because the solutions are there. If we can make a vaccine in 10 months when it used to take 4 years. I remember when the pandemic started, we had the whole food supply chain was able to function in an incredibly challenging time. The only thing that we were able to sort of get home, all of us somehow, was food. So we have this incredible potential for transformation, and so it's less of a technical, I feel like. It's much more of a willingness, and so I think I go back to what Sylvia said at the beginning, political willingness. Political will is what we need, and personal, I guess, also will is what we need. And Arne, I'm sorry I cut you off. I just had this in the back of my head that I felt I needed to say.
No, but thanks for that, and I agree with you. But I think it is, it's upon all of us to be willing to change, to see things differently, to behave differently, and because if your system's going to change, it starts with us as humans. So I think that is required. Just a couple of, so yeah. Yeah, so actually, some of us will have a meeting and a discussion with Frans Timmermans tomorrow morning at 9:30. So and CAP will be one of those discussions we will have with him. And I think we are aligned, but it's obviously a complex political process to address. But I think the private sector would actually very much argue in line with the Green Deal intentions that it needs to be repurposed. But how do you make that happen? That protects also that transition. So, but I'll give you a couple of examples that we will also discuss and share tomorrow, just a little bit on what companies are doing. So last week, Unilever announced that they set a new target for themselves as part of shifting to more plant-based protein and plant-based diets. And that will be how they do their ice cream or Hellmann's mayonnaise or other products. And they will try to reach €1 billion within 5 years. So that is trying to shift their portfolio quite dramatically to plant-based diets. So but obviously then they are dependent upon consumers actually then deciding to buy plant-based products instead of so I think that's one illustration of how companies are trying to step up. Another one, which my company did a few weeks back, together with Ørsted, which is the biggest, I think, globally on wind power. And that is to jointly set up a project outside the Netherlands for green hydrogen and green ammonia. And that would, do a couple of things. One is that we'll, be able to produce call it green fertilizer, so fertilizer without any carbon emissions. And it also could be that that will be supplying the shipping industry with green hydrogen. But at the moment, the cost of doing that is 3 times higher than using in hydrocarbons. So who takes that risk, or who covers that? So okay, so Yara is moving on it together with Ørsted, but it will depend upon also some support from the EU to get this. So and back to kind of what you said on why can't we accelerate change? And I think it just needs that civil society, companies, and governments need actually to come together, willing this change and stepping up and accelerating it, because it is possible to move faster, but it will take, because everybody's dependent on someone else. So I think that for me is, we're all at the center of this, and we have to kind of push for it, and we have to try to accelerate that change. And that's what we're doing actually through this Imagine Food Collective. We're trying to kind of put these CEOs at the center of it, and somehow put up a mirror to them, and also ask them, what about their own children, and what will you be asked, and what is your legacy, and what is your historic opportunity to make changes, and how can we support you in doing so, because we all know what needs to be done over the next few years.
Yes, I think we need to have leaders that are going to have the power and the courage to plan long term and actually invest in the next years, but not just being focused on the profit short term, because those changes need to be done. And the shareholder approach, the shareholders calling for the profit at the end of the year, of course, are a big push that can influence badly the decisions in this time in history, probably.
Can I just quick comment, and so for taking airtime here, but just on that, I think what you see is that the most progressive companies now are really talking about stakeholder capitalism. So that means that really recognizing how do we get long-term instead of short-term, and how do we make sure that there's value created for society, for customers, for employees, as well as for the owners or the shareholders.
Yeah, I would just like to add something, as the time is run away, on what Arne just shared. I think one of the key aspects is to inspire and educate people to have a huge impact on our society, because it's important to think about, the government side, policymakers, private sector, but we have, as humans, the power to decide how we can make responsible choices every day. And I think one of the most important aspects is to educate people, or to reduce the consumption of meat, and how to adopt a better and rich plant-based diet.
And just to close, I totally agree with that, and I want to throw in the mix communication. I think the example of Unilever was very well put, and Future 50, as Bea put in the chat, is a great piece of work. And I think shows that many companies are actually trying to do research and to implement some change. And it's very important to also focus on communication. What we're seeing is that very often there is a gap between what the company is trying to do and what the consumer is perceiving, and helping those companies in making what they're doing more appealing, more accessible for the larger population. I bumped into an article, into a piece of work, I'm going to post it here. It's called Edgy Veggie, and it's published by Stanford. It's how to make plant-based diets sound more appealing. The work we are doing with the Food for Climate League as well. I'm going to put the link here. It's all in that direction, and we're seeing that it's a huge issue. And I never thought of it before, but it is a huge issue in terms of how to effectively communicate those changes also to the final consumer.
And just very quickly, I just want to touch on Sarah and Arne, the stakeholder capitalism point, and this shared responsibility theme, just so important right now, so critical. And I think about that in terms of benefit corporations, B corporations who focus on that, and the power of the stories behind those companies are just so brilliant. And I think there's an opportunity there for larger companies. There's only 3,600 B corporations in the world. It's amazing, and every one of their stories is fabulous. And I think there's a big opportunity for larger companies to look at them and to kind of incorporate that sort of mindset and thinking into their corporate strategies, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Beatrice, you want to drop one last comment before moving toward conclusions?
It's a very short thought. I was just listening to Chiara speak about the report, and what I'm seeing is some of the 50 foods like algae, beans, ancient grains, and so on are becoming so trendy that maybe they are not anymore so accessible. So once we do these reports that say, hey, consume these foods, which are now very accessible and can help us as a society, companies use that chance to make them like the prices up for these more trendy foods. So I'm kind of confused. If now like ancient grains are going to become expensive, then they're not affordable anymore. So what do we do about this?
You're leaving us quite a big question there to end. I wanted to end and move towards conclusion. There's a risk here of reopening the debate, but Peter, do you have an urgent closing statement that you want to make? You're muted.
Excuse me. I take your point of view. I'm not going to elaborate too long, but just one thing. The Mediterranean diet shows one great thing, and that it is not about only just foods. It's about lifestyles. And the 50 foods, with the point that Beatrice just raised, is maybe not the only right approach. We should really look at diets and at lifestyles, and it's not just about food. It's about taste. It's about how we exercise, if we move enough, and things like that. So we really should look also from the food side more systemically, more as a whole, and not just as one food being good or bad.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I would like to ask Sarah and Anthony to come forward with your video to help us with some final thoughts and take us toward the end, and also briefly talk about our next Good After COVID-19 conversation coming up soon.
Shall I pick up?
Yeah, go.
Okay, so first of all, thank you everyone for this. It feels like the energy in the conversation could keep us going for many more hours. And it's been amazing and very varied. I've been asked to summarize this. I don't think I can. I'm going to add a couple of points here. It seems that there's a consensus that we alone amongst species, we're not the first species that have precipitated our own decline and raced towards our own extinction, but we are the first species that has the data and has the science-based evidence to know and be conscious of this and perhaps do something about it. So that in itself should hopefully give us some cause for hope. The conversation goes on that this paradigm shift will only be affected through a change in values. That is to say equity, transparency, and a value added and available to every part of this change. So a common theme seems to be that this change will be participatory, it'll be local, if not global and democratic. And through change agents such as microfinance and cooperatives. It's effectively a kind of democratic hacking. And I think also part of the interest for me is this idea that change will also be cultural, right? So we talked a little bit about taste, and that in effect we want to drive this change through storytelling. I think this seems to be how to move the democratic processes and political will and public participation. And we think we do this through this idea of telling stories through the human dimension. And I think right at the start we talked about the 9 seasons we have left to us. I think this kind of idea of embrace of popular language seems to be the kind of powerful way to communicate this, through making plant-based diets more appealing, through using tractors as Ubers. This kind of storytelling, I think, will be endemic to whatever the disruptive paradigm shift will be. We have to tell people stories that they can imagine themselves into the future. And the common words that this change will become affected through collaboration and empathy. So we see the end of one kind of paradigm within the United States, and hopefully by January that will stick. And we see an idea of collaboration across nation states. And what I thought, there was a phrase about that there is a table where we are invited to share. And I thought this is a good one for me. And then this table is not just the dining table where we break bread and we share communally. And this idea of food as being a ritual, I think, is important. But it's also the dining table is the same table where we share. It's also the boardroom table. It's where we share political process and commitment to joint change. So in a way, for me, the feeling is that the dining table is also the boardroom table, right? It's the same space, and as we've kind of defined over the course of this conversation, that food and political process are one and the same.
I would love to add something. We need to start to use food diplomacy to really achieve the goals we want to reach. And I think that food is a huge soft power that we can use really to nudge this change. Of course, there's so much to do. After this kind of conversation, after a fishbowl like that, I'm just thinking that I'm not doing enough, and I have to multiply the impact, and we're gonna keep going, getting inspired, but also trying, as Mark was saying at the beginning, really come up with tangible things and projects. I am so thankful because all your thoughts from all the different backgrounds, I think, gave what's the broad perspective we need to take when we talk about food. Food is complex, probably is the most complex thing that we have, that is touching everyone, but is, of course, connecting policy, political decisions, strategy behind the scenes, and of course, all the issues related to climate that we are all facing now. Thank you so much. I would love to keep going talking about those topics for the next hours ahead. We are going to try to summarize everything, to share with all of you which are the insights, and keep going on with the conversation. So I invite you to reach out to all of us, to reach out to the Good After COVID team, to us at Future Food, to Reboot, and Carlo, and let's keep the conversation going, and let's connect with the groups that are now leading those dialogues.
Can I ask everybody to put the video on before we disconnect, so that we have a good final picture of...
I invite you tonight or today, while you're celebrating, to think about what you're eating, because while you're gathering around the table, you're honoring your past, you are celebrating something with the people sharing with you the experience, but every bite is also preparing you to your future. And so I really invite you, while you're going to share tonight your dinner, to think about that. And then, Anthony, what's the next meeting we're going to have?
So today is all been about food in the future, and I ask you to put in your diary the 9th of December, only 2 weeks' time, Wednesday at it's 15:30 British Standard Time. We will have another discussion. This time it is arts in the future, and we ask, how can arts reboot the future? And we invite everyone on this call and listening on YouTube, come and join us. And excitingly, we will have Jude Kelly and Yo-Yo Ma, who will be our lead provocateurs for the discussion, asking the same questions we've asked of food. We will interrogate in the arts system, and have many distinguished arts practitioners to join that conversation also. So please come to the Good After COVID website or Reboot website, or join the mailing lists, and we look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you so much to all our thought leaders.
There have been a few silent participants, and I thank you very much, even for gifting us with your ability to listen patiently, and I'm sure connecting with the conversation in your own way, even if you didn't necessarily want to speak or could speak. But thank you so much. Pio, you've been inspiring us in this session. I just want to ask if you want to leave us before we go with a few final words. Yes, I got you on the spot now, just before we go.
Totally. I was not prepared to do anything like this, but thank you. As for final words, I would say it's not only that there is hope, but there are ways to make the change. We spoke a lot, we heard a lot of different from macro, micro levels about responsibilities and so on. The idea of getting stories together is to push the movement going, and all the struggle in this food system process, getting to the summit this next summer, is to try to get an intergenerational push. Yes, the lead should be this time. We should really make sure that are the youth being leading, but we should not be simply saying you lead and then we just turn in another direction. We should really get together, going there, and we will make it. We will make it, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
So much. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks everyone. Happy
Thank you all.
Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye. Bye.
Ciao.